The night was electric, the kind where the air feels charged with possibility. I remember walking into Club Spectrum, the most talked-about gay nightclub in the city, feeling both excited and slightly overwhelmed. The entrance hallway opened up to reveal a cavernous space where laser lights cut through artificial fog, creating momentary sculptures that dissolved as quickly as they formed. The bass was so powerful you could feel it in your chest, like a second heartbeat taking over your own. I wasn't usually one for crowded spaces, but tonight was different. Felix Midnight, the DJ who had been dominating the underground scene, was headlining. His sets were legendary, a perfect fusion of house, techno, and unexpected samples that somehow created a narrative through sound alone. I made my way through the crowd, nodding to a few familiar faces. The club was already packed, bodies moving in unison to the rhythm, a collective organism pulsating with the music. Some people were dressed in elaborate outfits that caught the light and transformed them into otherworldly creatures, while others wore simple black t-shirts that disappeared into the darkness between light flashes. I was somewhere in between, having put thought into my appearance without going overboard, a blue button-up with subtle iridescent threads that caught the light just right, paired with my favorite black jeans. Let me explain why this night mattered so much to me. After months of working overtime, barely seeing friends, and essentially living in a bubble of responsibility, this was my first real night out. Music had always been my escape, my way of processing emotions too complex for words. Felix Midnight's latest tracks had been the soundtrack to my late-night work sessions, somehow making the isolation bearable. Being here, about to experience his music in its intended environment, felt like completing a circuit connecting the private moments of solace to a communal celebration. The opening DJ was finishing his set, building to a crescendo that had the crowd cheering. The anticipation was palpable as tech crew moved around the elevated DJ booth, preparing for the main event. The booth itself was a marvel of design, a sleek, curved platform raised about 5 feet off the ground, surrounded by LED panels that pulsed with geometric patterns. It was positioned at the far end of the club, commanding attention like an altar in a temple of sound. As Felix took the stage, the crowd surged forward. I found myself being pushed closer to the booth than I'd intended, caught in a human tide. Felix was magnetic, tall and lean with an undercut that accentuated his sharp features, fingers moving with practiced precision over the equipment. He wore headphones slung around his neck, occasionally bringing one side to his ear as he worked his magic. There was something mesmerizing about watching someone so completely in their element, creating an experience that hundreds of people were sharing in real time. The first hour of his set was mind-blowing. The way he layered sounds created moments of tension and release that had the crowd responding like they were part of the instrument he was playing. Despite my initial reservations about the crowd, I found myself dancing, losing track of time and space in that wonderful way that only happens when you're fully present in a moment. The press of bodies around me became less claustrophobic and more comforting, a reminder that we were all sharing something special. But as the night wore on, the club grew even more crowded. What had been a comfortable density became something more challenging. People pushed from behind, drinks were spilled, and the temperature rose to an uncomfortable level. I found myself being squeezed closer to the DJ booth, practically pressed against it, trying to maintain a small bubble of personal space. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, technically in the best spot in the house, right up front, yet increasingly unable to enjoy the music as I fought for breath and space. That's when it happened. In the middle of transitioning between tracks, Felix looked down and our eyes met. It was one of those moments that shouldn't mean anything. DJs must make eye contact with hundreds of people during a set, but somehow this felt different. There was a flicker of recognition, though we'd never met. Perhaps he saw my discomfort, or maybe there was something else, some invisible thread of connection that can't be explained rationally. He held my gaze for a beat longer than necessary, then gave an almost imperceptible nod before returning to his equipment. I thought that was it, a brief moment of acknowledgement before the night continued on its predetermined course. But a few minutes later, during a particularly intense track that had the crowd jumping in unison, he leaned down toward me. "You look like you could use some air," he half-shouted over the music, his voice surprisingly clear despite the volume surrounding us. Before I could respond, he gestured to the side of the booth where a small gap was barely visible between the platform and the wall. With a quick glance to ensure no security was watching, he extended his hand. I took it without hesitation, a decision so unlike my usually cautious self that it surprised me even as I made it. With a swift movement that spoke of having done this before, he pulled me into the darkness beneath the DJ booth. The space was surprisingly larger than it appeared from outside, though still cramped enough that we were immediately in close proximity. The difference was immediate and disorienting. Though the music was still loud, the booth structure created a strange acoustic bubble where we could hear each other without shouting. The temperature was cooler, and the press of bodies was replaced by the gentle hum of equipment above us. "Better?" Felix asked, his face now visible in the dim light that filtered through the gaps in the structure. Up close, I could see details I'd missed from the dance floor: a small scar above his right eyebrow, the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the slight stubble along his jawline. "Much," I replied, suddenly aware of how bizarre the situation was. "Do you make a habit of pulling strangers under your booth?" He laughed, a warm sound that somehow cut through the bass without competing with it. "Only the ones who look like they're about to pass out. I've been watching you for the past 20 minutes. You went from dancing like nobody was watching to looking like you were calculating escape routes. That obvious, huh?" I smiled, leaning against one of the support beams. I wasn't planning on being front row tonight. The crowd had other ideas. "The crowd has a mind of its own," Felix nodded, adjusting something on a small controller he'd brought down with him. "I've got about 2 minutes before I need to start the next transition. Just enough time for a proper introduction. I'm Felix." "I know," I said, immediately regretting how fan-like it sounded. "I mean, I've been following your work for a while." "I'm Jamie. Nice to meet you." "Jamie, who's been following my work," he said with a smirk that made my stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with the bass vibrating through the floor. There was something surreal about having a relatively normal conversation in such an abnormal setting, crouched beneath a DJ booth while hundreds of people danced just feet away, completely unaware of our hidden exchange. The contrast created an immediate sense of intimacy, like we were sharing a secret that existed outside the normal rules of time and space. "I need to get back up there," Felix said, glancing at his watch. "But you're welcome to stay down here as long as you need. It's not the VIP section they advertise, but it's got its perks." He gestured to a small cooler I hadn't noticed. "Water, energy drinks. Help yourself. And if you want to rejoin the land of the living, just slip out when you're ready. Security knows people sometimes need a breather." With that, he climbed back up to his equipment, leaving me in this strange liminal space, neither fully part of the club experience nor separate from it. I took a bottle of water from the cooler, grateful for the thoughtfulness of this unexpected sanctuary. Through the gaps in the structure, I could see fragments of the dance floor, flashes of movement, snippets of faces caught in moments of pure joy or concentration. It was like watching a movie with most of the frames missing, my mind filling in the gaps to create a coherent narrative. I don't know how long I stayed there, sipping water and experiencing the club from this unique vantage point. The music took on a different quality. I could feel the physical vibrations through the structure while simultaneously hearing how the sound moved through the space above. It was an education in acoustics I hadn't expected. Eventually, I noticed Felix looking down occasionally, checking if I was still there. Each time our eyes met, he'd give a small smile before returning to his work. There was something incredibly attractive about watching someone so skilled at their craft, especially from this privileged position where I could see details the crowd couldn't, the slight furrow of concentration between his brows when working on a complex transition, the subtle head nod when he hit a perfect beat match, the way his fingers hovered over controls with precision that spoke of years of practice. After what must have been at least half an hour, Felix crouched down again during what seemed to be a pre-programmed segment of his set. "Still hiding out?" he asked, his smile wider now, more relaxed. "It's fascinating down here," I admitted. "Like being backstage at a concert, but better because I can still experience everything." "Most people would be climbing the walls to get back to the action by now," he observed, taking a swig from his own water bottle. "I'm not most people," I replied, surprising myself with the confidence in my voice. "I noticed that," Felix said, holding my gaze a beat longer than necessary. "That's why I pulled you under here in the first place." The air between us shifted, charged with something beyond the electricity of the club atmosphere. In the strange half-light beneath the booth, with the muffled roar of the crowd creating a cocoon of white noise around us, it felt like we existed in our own pocket dimension where normal social rules were suspended. "What exactly did you notice?" I asked, curiosity overcoming my usual reserve. Felix settled into a more comfortable position, his shoulder now touching mine in the confined space. "You dance differently than most people. Not for show, not to impress anyone. Like you're having a conversation with the music itself." He paused, looking slightly embarrassed. "That probably sounds pretentious as hell." "No," I said quickly. "That's exactly what it feels like when it's good music. Like yours. His smile in response was different from the confident grin he flashed to the crowd, smaller, more genuine, almost shy. I've got about 15 minutes before I need to focus on the closing sequence. Tell me something real about yourself, Jamie. Something you wouldn't tell someone you just met in normal circumstances. The request should have felt invasive, but somehow it didn't. Perhaps it was the absurdity of our meeting, or the temporary nature of our connection, but I found myself answering honestly. I've been using your music as therapy, I admitted. Had a pretty rough breakup 6 months ago. The kind where you not only lose a partner, but also your sense of who you are. Your Midnight Sessions EP got me through some really dark nights. Felix nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. That's the highest compliment I could receive. Music should be functional that way. Not just entertainment, but emotional processing. I wrote that EP during my own rough patch. Guess that energy translated. Your turn, I said. Something real. He took a deep breath. I'm terrified every time I perform. Been doing this for 8 years, and I still get sick to my stomach before each set. The persona, Felix Midnight, he's confident, untouchable. But underneath, I'm just Alex from the suburbs who still can't believe people want to hear what I create. Alex, I repeated, testing the name. It suits you better than Felix, actually. Only my family calls me that anymore, he said with a small laugh. Well, and now you. There was something incredibly intimate about being entrusted with his real name, like being allowed to see behind the curtain of his public persona. The space between us seemed to shrink further, though neither of us had moved. I should warn you, he said, his voice dropping lower, that I don't usually do this. Pull fans under your booth for heart-to-hearts? I asked, trying to keep my tone light despite the heavy thrumming of my pulse. Find myself wanting to see someone again after my set ends, he replied, his directness catching me off guard. Before I could formulate a response, the track above changed, and Alex, Felix to the rest of the world, glanced up. That's my 2-minute warning. I need to get back up there. He hesitated, then pulled a Sharpie from his pocket. Your phone probably doesn't work in here, and I don't have time to put my number in it anyway. Without further explanation, he took my arm and wrote a series of digits on the inside of my wrist, his touch sending an entirely different kind of vibration through my body than the bass had been providing. If you want to continue this conversation somewhere with actual air and less noise, text me. I'm free after 3 a.m. With that, he climbed back to his equipment, leaving me with racing thoughts and the warm impression of his fingers still lingering on my skin. I stayed beneath the booth for another 10 minutes, processing what had just happened, before finally slipping out when a particularly energetic track had everyone's attention focused firmly on the dance floor. Emerging back into the crowd felt like returning from another dimension, the lights brighter, the heat more intense, the press of bodies more immediate. But now, instead of feeling trapped by the crowd, I felt strangely protected by it, anonymous once more except to the one person who mattered. I made my way to a slightly less crowded spot where I could still see the DJ booth clearly. From this new vantage point, I watched Alex work his magic with fresh eyes. Knowing the person behind the persona added layers to the performance, I could see now when Felix Midnight took over and when glimpses of Alex showed through. It was like being let in on a secret that made the entire experience richer. The final 30 minutes of his set were spectacular, a masterclass in building and releasing tension through sound. The crowd responded with increasing energy, reaching a collective euphoria during the final tracks. When he finally played his signature closing song, a haunting melody layered over driving beats that somehow managed to be both melancholic and hopeful, I felt a lump form in my throat. The music that had been my private comfort during lonely nights was now a shared experience, connecting me not just to its creator, but to every person moving around me. As the final notes faded and the club lights came up slightly to signal the transition to the next DJ, Felix took about a thunderous applause. His eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment, I thought he was looking for me. But the club was too packed, the lighting too chaotic for such a specific search. He disappeared backstage, and the next DJ took over, maintaining the energy but shifting the musical direction. I stayed for another hour, dancing with newfound freedom now that I had more space. But my mind kept returning to the moments beneath the booth, the conversation that had felt more genuine than many I'd had in conventional settings. The digits on my wrist seemed to pulse with potential, a decision waiting to be made. At 2:30 a.m., I finally left the club, the cool night air a shock after hours in the heated atmosphere inside. Standing on the sidewalk, watching taxis pull up and groups of friends decide on after-parties, I pulled out my phone. The numbers on my wrist had smudged slightly but were still legible. My thumb hovered over the keypad as doubts crept in. Was this just part of his routine, picking someone from the crowd for a moment of connection that meant nothing once the music stopped? Was I reading too much into what might have been simple kindness? But then I remembered the way he'd said, Alex, sharing a piece of himself that wasn't part of the public package. And really, what did I have to lose? The worst that could happen was no response, which would leave me exactly where I'd been before walking into the club tonight. I typed a simple message. This is Jamie from under the booth. Still up for continuing our conversation somewhere quieter? The response came faster than I expected. There's a 24-hour diner 3 blocks east of the club. Best terrible coffee in town. 30 minutes. I smiled at my phone, suddenly aware of how this night had transformed from a simple escape from routine into something potentially life-changing. I'll be there, I replied, already walking in the direction he'd indicated. The night air felt electric with possibility as I made my way through streets still buzzing with late-night energy. Whatever happened next, whether this was the beginning of something significant or simply a beautiful moment in time, I was grateful for the crowded club that had pushed me right where I needed to be, and for the DJ who had pulled me under his booth, giving us both a chance to breathe and connect in the most unexpected of spaces. As I approached the diner, I could see a figure waiting outside, not Felix Midnight the DJ, but Alex from the suburbs, looking both nervous and hopeful. He smiled when he saw me, and I knew with certainty that the real magic of the night was just beginning. Total _char_count, 18,734.